Arbro Solutions, we are migration experts in document management systems, providing complete end-to-end solutions for the legal and corporate markets worldwide. Arbro Solutions is the only iManage partner who supports clients and other iManage partners with a full suite of products and services, from consulting, planning and design, to implementation, training, and a host of on-demand and specialized solutions. And with over 30 of our own intelligent software solutions that extend the capabilities of iManage work, we are unrivaled in ensuring our clients get the maximum benefit from their iManage investments. Today, we will be discussing the critical path to the iManage cloud. But before that, I just want to share a little information. We will be sending you a recording of the presentation after the webinar. We ask that you submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation, and we will do a Q&A at the end. And we also have a survey that will pop up at the end of the presentation. We ask that you please complete it. So our panelists today includes John LaReverend, our sales solution consultant, and Dan Lees is a senior consultant at Arbro. John has empowered Arbro clients to be more productive and efficient for over 12 years. With a wealth of experience in legal technology and extensive knowledge of the challenges professional service firms face, he analyzes and recommends the best suited solutions. Dan has worked in the legal technology sector for over 10 years. He has observed how technology has evolved and innovated new and exciting ways to interact with a firm's content, increasing end user adoption and mitigating risk through both technical knowledge and consulting understanding. And now I will turn it over to John.
Great, thanks, Althea. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to be discussing moving to the cloud. This is part 2 of a 3-part webinar series that we're going to be discussing. The previous one was about preparing yourself and looking at your data ahead of getting into the process of actually moving your data. So if you've missed that one, we'll have a link to that on our website. So today we're going to discuss the actual process to understand what actually has to happen and how to get to the cloud. Discuss about planning an effective rollout and the benefits of being proactive. So we know that everything is in front of you and there's no surprises. That's what we're ultimately trying to go for here, is a stress-free migration. So getting started here, many paths. Depending on where you are now, that is going to really determine how to get to the cloud. And there's different options for each one of these as well. So we're going to start off with looking at new clients that don't have any document management system that need to go to the cloud. This is something we see a lot of in corporate. This is a major thing right now for firms that weren't really looking at document management, but now it's really easy because of the cloud option. There's not a lot of on-prem servers to stand up, a lot of approvals and red tape to go through for getting infrastructure projects on site. So this is where we see a lot of firms moving in that direction. Then looking at taking that same scenario, but if you have data in a number of different places and it requires some collection and some advanced staging, there is the option to collect that information and stage it in an on-prem iManage library first, and then being able to shift that to the cloud. So a couple of scenarios about why that might be required. Being able to do advanced manipulation with the content through SQL, through accessing the file store. All these things typically need to be on-prem because of the way that the cloud limits access to the SQL database. Everything has to be done through REST APIs. So for any content that is requiring some advanced configuration, there is an opportunity to stage that in a local iManage environment on-prem. This likely wouldn't be ever connected to directly from end users, so this doesn't have to be fully scaled out in the way that you would as if you were working live on-prem. Just as an a database and a file store to stage that information first. And you can also have the ability to synchronize that data. So that wouldn't happen really close before your migration date. This would happen a long time before so that the data could be organized. And this is possibly to bring content into a matter-centric structure or project-centric, depending on your industry, and to give you some advanced opportunity to really clean up the data if that wasn't possible prior to doing it in Windows. In some cases, there are advanced scripts that can do things a lot more efficient than having people manually move and edit folder names and things like that, especially for large amounts of content. The other scenario we look at is firms who are on other document management systems, whether they're on-prem or not, and being able to look at how that content can be transferred directly to the cloud. So the two scenarios here are with and without staging, and with or without consolidation. Other content management systems we've seen have frequently a lot of different libraries. So with the iManage Cloud, that requirement just to have regional libraries tends to go away or is lessened greatly. So if you had 4 to 8 or more libraries, likely you won't need that many when you go to the iManage Cloud. So there's an easy way to consolidate that data first. And the best way to do that, again, is possibly to do it on-prem, so you have more control over the data, to have it consolidated, to look at in detail what that would look like and how the structures get finalized so that you don't need to do any advanced manipulation once it's already in the cloud to reorganize and structure content. The other side of that is also looking at archives. So as much as there's consolidation effort, occasionally, a lot of times there's archiving. For firms that have been in operation for many, many years and have a large amount of data, we usually see when they're looking at moving to the cloud, there's a question of, does all of this really have to come to the cloud where it's going to be adding up as part of our storage amount? So some firms look at doing a retention policy overview to look at, is there any of this content that we can safely get rid of, and making sure that that content is separated, possibly to another iManage library or deleted. Last two options here are existing iManage clients who are on-prem and looking to go to the cloud. So a similar scenario could be if you had multiple iManage libraries and you want to consolidate them, or possibly archive some of that content. But the two scenarios would be if everything is relatively consolidated, it's pretty clean, you've looked at your structures, there's no real major changes needed. That's the simplest way to get your content to the cloud, is to mirror it exactly from where it is now on a local or hosted server and directly translate that to your iManage cloud environment. So there's different tools for some of these processes. Initially, if you're looking at collecting content in the first scenario there with no DMS, there's some tools to collect it from Windows file stores, from other content management systems, to look in and query databases. And then the last scenario where we're just basically taking an existing iManage environment and just moving it to the cloud, it's a lot simpler because there's no translation of data needed. There is some cleanup required. We covered this in detail in our last webinar, where making sure you understand the data, you've gone through and run some checks to make sure that there's no inconsistencies in your data, a lot of items to cover to make sure that when you actually start moving your data, you're not going to get a lot of errors. So there's a key steps to that, and there's a lot of advice and scripting that we can provide to make sure that your data is in good shape for that. So basically, looking at where you are and which one of these scenarios applies is the first part of your process, and figuring out what is our strategy for going to the cloud. How is the data physically going to move? So that's what we're looking at in this webinar, and determining what that best path is. And in some cases, depending on if you are a client yourself or if you're a third-party integrator, some of these scenarios might work with some of your existing processes. If you have existing processes that you have to collect data and stage it into an on-prem environment, those can still be used when you're looking at moving it to the cloud. So whatever your existing process was to collect data, to stage it in an on-prem, that's the same. And then when you actually look at that point from taking that staging environment to the cloud is where you could now utilize some new solutions for doing that in an efficient manner, and also being able to work with the iManage APIs. So move on to planning an effective rollout. We touched on this in the last webinar as well, and looking at the different options for the clients. So this is a really key decision. Initially, some firms might decide to just keep everything the way it is on the client side, and then look at the Work 10 desktop options later. iManage has put a lot of information out there on the advantages and the Work 10 desktop, and everybody is anticipating the next release as we're getting into that stage now where it's reaching parity with your classic clients. For firms that are new to the iManage platform, there's been previously separate clients. They're referred to as classic clients that are file site and desk site. They're legacy applications that have been around for many decades from iManage, and their functionality is being added into the Work 10 desktop. So overall, just looking at what options you have and where you're coming from again, it's to choose your path basically is looking at where you're starting from. If you're a brand new firm considering iManage, really the only option is to use the Work 10 desktop. As much as you can use the classic clients, you'll notice that they look quite a bit different than the integrated Work 10 desktop, which has the web option and a newer refreshed interface that is available through Outlook and through your Microsoft Office applications. So we'll just go through each of these scenarios and discuss some options around each of them. So for firms who are already on iManage using a classic client, such as FileSite or DeskSite, there is some firms that don't want to touch it at all initially. Maybe we'll look at it as a future item, and that's something that is possible. And what you can do in that case is optionally still have the Work 10 web page available. So if you don't want to touch the desktops, if there's a desktop refresh coming up shortly, or there's other reasons why it's just not applicable right now to go and do a client upgrade, there is an option to deploy the Work 10 web page on its own. But if you're not going to touch the desktop, there's key things where it's not going to be in an integrated mode, where that would be looking at going into one of the classic client modes where you're going to be able to actually check out files to the new checkout directory. So this is basically just for a light touch into introducing, possibly just to select users, what that new Work 10 web panel and web page look like. Moving into the two next modes, kind of a hybrid approach to it. There's the classic client conservative mode, where you're having some pieces still look like you are working today with integration with the FileSite and DeskSite clients. What that looks like in this scenario here is you'd still have FileSite and or DeskSite installed, depending on what one you're using. In Outlook, you still have the FileSite tree on the left-hand side as you're used to, if that's what you're using right now. Optionally, this integration is being added so you can show the new Work 10 panel on the right side of the screen. So that's that web panel that you can turn on and off, so you don't always have to have it on there. So that is available. So this is where maybe people initially won't know what that is, but they want to add it in, as they become more familiar and start exploring the new features of the Work 10 desktop. The email management toolbar is Work 10. One of the key features you'll notice in that is a refreshed view and UI to it, and also the ability to file an email to multiple workspaces. So that's a key thing that some clients are very excited to see. So that integration and that capability is available. When you're looking at your Microsoft Office apps, so Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, when you're looking at the open and save menus, that is the classic integration. So that is when you're looking at right now with FileSite and DeskSite, there's typically a gray type of window that pops up and will give you that integration. So if you're used to seeing that, that's the lightest touch change, basically where you can keep that exactly the same. There really is nothing changing with your Microsoft Office apps. We're just introducing the Work 10 panel as an option in Outlook, and in some cases, the web panel, the web page as well. Moving into the next mode, I'm kind of doing this in lightest touch to heaviest touch in terms of if you are changing from an old classic client to a newer one. The compatibility mode, everything the same as a conservative mode, with the exception of in your Microsoft Office apps, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, when you're opening and saving, you're using those new Work 10 panels. So you're seeing that refreshed dialog that has things organized by documents, emails, workspaces, and clients. So you're not seeing your classic interface where you have recent documents, My Matters, and all those items that are typically down the left-hand side. They're in the new web panel. And then the full option of taking classic clients away from your machine and going with the complete Work 10 desktop, so the full newer version of iManage. This would be what any new client would be seeing on their desktop. In Outlook, you have the Work 10 panel only, which appears on the right-hand side of the screen. You have your newer version of the email management toolbar that has the additional capabilities of filing to multiple workspaces. Your Microsoft Office apps are integrated with that same web panel experience. So wherever you're looking, you're seeing that same experience. So it's consistent between Outlook, your Microsoft Office apps, and that web page itself. So really one experience for everything. And that's also where you can start using mobile capabilities to connect in. The key thing to note on that is if you had third-party COM-based integrations before and you're removing those classic clients, that's something where you need to do some checking to make sure that they're still going to function, or possibly need to get newer versions of those scripts or applications to make sure that they're going to work with the new REST-based APIs from iManage. So that is, for some firms, a large task. So that's something that I wanted to call out here to make sure that if those clients are being uninstalled, a lot of third-party applications rely on those local DLLs and COM-based functionality to contact and to connect with iManage to surface documents. So now we're going to move into some other considerations overall for what that looks like in terms of moving to the cloud. I'm going to turn this over to our senior consultant, Dan.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. So there's obviously what John has gone through previously is things to think about from your end user's point of view with what they're actually going to use. But that's only a very small part of the project that's going to go ahead as a whole. So you'll see the 8 points, the very high level 8 points that we kind of stick around to when delivering a project. They have touch points throughout the course of the project, but a lot of it is done up front. So at least that way we're able to prepare and identify and execute effectively and anticipate any errors, any challenges that are going to come up through the life cycle of the project. So the first one I'm going to refer to is the cloud solution technical requirements. So this is where out of the box, or when an initial iManage cloud implementation is configured, iManage will provide a very default setup. So the Cloud Technical Solutions document allows us the opportunity to understand the client's current iManage environment, if they have one, and identify and advise on items that will change after go live. So things like, the cloud URLs that are going to become in place. The email domain for send and file is going to change. The security model potentially is going to change. And how those changes are going to influence other aspects. So an example that we've been working with recently is that a client of ours has actually built a business culture to train their users to type in email addresses for send and file purposes. So they have the client.matter and then the email domain. So obviously, if that business culture is ingrained in people, the sudden email domain change is a big challenge for them. So we've had to work with iManage to come up with an interim solution in preparation for when they're actually going to change their end user deployments going forwards. The solution, the cloud solution, also gives us the opportunity to change functionality. So maybe there's a change that's been in the works. Maybe the current environment uses client-side filing. Maybe when they move to the cloud, you might want to implement server-side filing. So it's those kind of things to help identify and see what's possible, how it's going to impact, and then make a decision as to whether that is how you want iManage to configure it. It's also proven to us on numerous occasions to get as much information as possible up front from the client and basically be submitted to iManage so they can configure it in the best possible way from the beginning. So we've had partial submissions before, but submitting changes later can be tricky to accommodate and test efficiently. And not knowing things up front has been known to cause things further down the line. So that's a really important part of this of a project, is getting that clear understanding of how it's working now, how it's going to work, and that then puts us on a good foundation to progress through the project. So the next stage of the project would obviously be the cloud readiness and the pre-frac checklist. So that was covered in depth in part 1 of this webinar series. So if you missed that one, I would definitely advise you to go and catch up on that. It covers an awful lot of data, cleanup, what we look for. It also gives you a chance to kind of draw a line in the sand to say, okay, right, you know, our legacy data, it maybe not be in the greatest shape. So let's take the opportunity to clean it up and get a good start, a good slate going in the cloud. Those kind of checks also allow you to identify any direct SQL that potentially used. So obviously direct SQL in the cloud is no longer available. If you have direct SQL reporting, then obviously those need to be identified, and a workaround or a new solution needs to be devised. One other thing that is very important, and we experienced recently, was a client was actually running a newer version of SQL Server than was currently available in iManage. So the current version for iManage is SQL Server 2016. This client was running SQL Server 2017. So we had to essentially, again, work with them to downgrade, in air quotes, to an older version so that was then compatible with iManage. So obviously we were able to identify that early enough that it didn't actually impact the project to any major extent, but it was definitely something that we're glad we identified early up front and not suddenly have to backtrack and deal with it more urgently. So once we've done all that data cleanup, we're now into the migration stage. So obviously the migration is the most important part of any project. We've got to get the data to iManage in one of the many ways that John's already outlined in this webinar. So obviously, if we're depending on the amount of data that you're trying to upload, there are obviously different options. The new way of uploading content to iManage is through AZ Copy or Azure Copy. It is much faster than the old SFTP, and but we can still use hard disks. So if your data amount is of a large amount, so it started out as 2 terabytes, it then changed to 4. So it's one of those things that constantly evolves. So if you have enough data to exceed that threshold, the best option is to go a hard disk. But obviously with a hard disk, there are special requirements that are specific requirements that are around those hard disks, which is all available from iManage. Things like it can't have an external fob. So again, it's one of those. Let's understand the hard disk that the client needs to buy, or if the client has already a hard disk, if it meets those requirements. Then if it doesn't, it gives the client the chance early in the project to address that and purchase a new disk. Obviously, that hard disk needs to be encrypted. We've run into a couple of challenges around BitLocker. It's always good to encrypt the disk first, so that as the data gets transferred onto the disk, it's obviously encrypted at that stage, as opposed to copying all of the data onto the disk and then trying to encrypt it. You could potentially double the amount of time that it actually takes to get the data in a position where the disk is ready to be shipped. So once we've got all of the data cleaned up and it's on its way to iManage, either via the hard disk or the SFTP, or using partners like Arbore's Lift and Shift to direct you to the cloud, that's going to be nicely ticking along, and we'll go over a lot more of this in the next few slides of this webinar. Whilst that's going on, you'll have time to monitor, but you'll also then be able to start thinking about, well, probably not start thinking about, because we've already should have at least had conversations around this and started to understand things, but the end user deployment. So John's already talked about the different client options that are available. My thing is more, when should this happen? So understanding how you want to deploy it out to your users. Do you use software like SCCM? Do you use deployment scripts? And then based off of how you do that, we can help build packages and test thoroughly to make sure that what is actually going to be delivered to users will be good when the time comes to actually do it. So there's a few different approaches that we've experienced over the last year or so with many cloud migrations. Is when do you do it? One option is obviously the old Big Bang approach over a single weekend. Will users, but with a Big Bang approach, it all depends on how many users you're targeting. Is it feasible? If you've only got 10 users, potentially it is. If you've got hundreds and hundreds, potentially it isn't. You also then have to think about, will users have laptops? They won't be in the office, so they potentially may not get that. So you need to plan accordingly. Another option is, do you just reconfigure your classic clients with the new connection details and everybody goes live as if nothing has changed, and then you start to phase roll out the new software over the course of the next few weeks? When we actually come to testing of end user deployments, you'd want to test order of install with existing applications on that have iManage integration points, so such as any PDF solutions, any comparison solutions. Sometimes when you uninstall software, you lose the integration points if they don't already exist on the system. So thinking about things that are going to help you identify potential challenges and obstacles and work through them before the time comes when you actually come to do it. Once we've kind of decided how and when you want to do your end user deployments, we need to start thinking about training. So everybody needs to be trained. People that have worked with iManage for a long time are very used to the classic clients of FileSite and DeskSite. Now, Work 10 is obviously a visual change and a big behavioral change. So even experienced iManage users understand the concepts, but it's a very different experience. But it's not just end users that need to be trained. There's also your iManage administrators that now don't have access to dbadmin. They will now have access to the iManage Control Center, which works slightly differently. It has a different look, has a different feel, has a different way to apply roles. Your support team. So if you have an IT support desk, they're going to need to be able to support their end users from an end user point of view. So they'll need to be trained on both iManage and the iManage Control Center. So making sure that everybody is trained up is a huge aspect to the end user adoption and getting people to actually get excited about using the new software and how they want to and how they want to actually get them excited to what they actually want to use them. But just touching on another option that I have experienced with a client before is that around the end user deployment that went out as a classic client. And they actually did their training over a period of the next 3 to 4 weeks with sessions of approximately 8 to 10 people. And whilst those 8 to 10 people were in that room, their machine was upgraded. So when they came back, they were then in that Work 10 place that they had just gone through training. So everything was fresh in their mind, and they were able to attack the day and carry on with their work as if they were just continuing to use their legacy FileSite and DeskSite clients. User acceptance testing. So again, they're all very important points that need to be decided on early in the project and then touched on a number of times before actual go live. So user acceptance testing is the project team. We can get it to a certain point, but we don't know everybody's behavioral traits, everybody's behavioral habits. I may use the system differently to somebody else. So user acceptance testing will obviously allow us to help with identifying those core functionality issues, and also any other behavioral issues that somebody does that will change from the way that they currently do it to what they're going to have to do going forwards. A lot of that will also be helped out and dealt with training. Ideally, user acceptance testing should have a wide range of users, purely because everybody works differently. UAT should ideally be what is going to be deployed. So again, deciding on the different client option that you want, building your end user deployment packages, testing those end user deployment packages, and then UATing against what you're going to go live with. You don't want to suddenly say, yeah, we want to go with file site or desk site and work 10, and then forget about some of the third-party integrations that are going to be needed. So you need to think about the whole package. And with using obviously I'm biased with Arbro's lift and shift tool, the ability to roll back UAT and have multiple UAT sessions in the cloud without affecting any on-prem data is a big differentiator for us. So user acceptance testing normally goes on for 1 to 2 weeks. And then after that, once it's been signed off, and all any errors, showstopper errors that have been remediated, you're then into real go live planning, preparing. When do you want to do it? The communication plan. How are you going to communicate when it's going to happen to users? Any change control approval that's needed. Plan to have your client team on standby just in case of unforeseen obstacles. We suddenly lose access to SQL to take the backup, or some network issues that happen that prevent us from doing it, from actually going live. Building an effective run sheet, making sure that all of the tasks on both sides, both partner and client, are identified so that we can provide a full picture of what everybody needs to do, so everybody knows what they need to do. There's no questioning who is doing what. The setting up of a conference call facility that everybody can jump into as and when is necessary. Things that are going to build confidence that this is going to go well, that this is going to succeed, this is going to be successful. So once go live has happened, we're then into post-migration support. So what happens next? We've done, we're live in the cloud. Well, there's always obstacles in the first few days, but with this planning and the preparation and the testing and all the training, we're trying to limit and mitigate the obstacles to how do I type questions, as opposed to system or configuration issues, which should have been identified in a number of different places earlier in the project. Once the project has been completed, iManage actually provides support direct for cloud customers. There is a support handover process call that happens between iManage and the partner and the client, usually scheduled in advance of go live, so that there is no to get members of the client team registered with iManage so they can raise support cases as and when is necessary, but also to just be there and be on hand should anything happen. So that's kind of the high level points that we try and stick to. A lot of it is these kind of discussions happen up front in the project, but have a lot of touch points and ongoing discussions as the project progresses. John, I think the next slide.
Yes, thanks, Dan. So we'll go through, I kind of consolidated some of the scenarios to 2 major points here. If your data is going to be going from another source to the cloud, so from a non-iManage source, just to discuss what that looks like. In some cases, this involves a collection of the data, then being able to look at the source to review and map all those things that we discussed before. If there needs to be some kind of cleanup of data, if there's content that you want to be removed because it's can be archived, things like that can happen at this point. Then we look at doing a collection into a staging database. So this isn't actually the on-prem staging that we mentioned before. This is just basically collecting the information and populating a database of information of how that's going to go into iManage. So before you start moving the documents yet, this is that collection period. where you can review the content, make sure that if you're doing things like querying folder structures, make sure those queries are pulling back all the right information so you know if something is on a folder that maps correctly into a workspace in iManage. If you're coming from another content management system, making sure that that data is being translated correctly from its structure into the iManage structure, and understanding differences in things like versions, mappings, metadata fields, things like that are all taking place at this point here. So that when you're looking at moving that to actually taking the documents and moving them now, they're not going to have any issues with that. Then the next part comes to actually taking that staging, and that can be done in an iterative process. Sometimes you may want to run that collection over again to get better and better results to make sure that you have a good success. Then taking that content and actually moving it directly into the cloud. So running your the latter half of your import process to actually start transferring files and moving into the cloud. So that's something that we see as being very important. And in some cases, many cases, you actually have to look at not just doing that once, but doing it multiple times. So the very first time you take a copy of the data, you don't want to do that on the Friday before go live, because there could be a lot of issues you need to work through with the data, depending on its cleanliness and how the mappings have been created. So doing that first collection to staging and to the cloud, this would be now in the cloud, but not live. So we can do that initial collection well ahead of time to see what kind of obstacles you need to look at overcoming. And then the whole time people are able to still work. This isn't the downtime part yet. Then maybe practice a Delta scenario where maybe a day or so goes by and now you want to just capture the documents that have changed. So once you've done those two processes, you're getting more and more confident that the data in the cloud is able to be refreshed easily, so that when you actually do that Delta cutover on a weekend, possibly, or depending on the amount of data and the amount of deltas, possibly a weeknight, you have more predictability around that, and there's less risk in something going wrong and having to push that out. So that's the first stage, where you're looking at coming from a non-iManage source, and this could take on various different steps as well. In the event where you're looking at doing a consolidation of this as well, all that could happen first on the source. There could be some pre-steps to this too, if you are looking at taking multiple libraries and merging them, maybe archiving some content out. So that is assuming that now you have this source that is ready to go directly into the cloud. That's when you'd start this process. Next up, we're going to look at is a scenario where you have content that is in that staging environment first, and now we need to take that to the cloud. So I'll let Dan go through and discuss how this process comes together.
Yeah, sure. So the iManage source, obviously, this is where we're going to have done all of those pre-flight checks and those cloud readiness. So all of your data is being reviewed and cleaned up, and it's in a position now where we're ready to do our initial shipment to iManage. So obviously the three options were using an external hard drive, using the new AZ copy, or using a third-party partner's migration tool. So we're preparing the initial migration and we ship it to iManage. Whilst iManage is restoring that data into the cloud, which normally takes approximately 2 to 3 weeks, is our experience of how quickly they're able to copy that data off and restore it into their environment. We're preparing, we're tracking that, monitoring. We're monitoring your current on-premise environment for all of the changes that have happened since those initial backups were taken and the initial migration was kicked off. So once iManage has restored the initial migration, we want to bring that cloud back up to date again with however many weeks worth of changes that have happened, new workspaces, new documents, new metadata. So we'll perform an initial synchronization using the lift and shift tool that we've got, which brings it all up to date. Once we're in that, we're then ready to go into UAT. So we're then able to switch the tool. We stop synchronizing from on-premise. We then start to monitor activity in the cloud. Users are able to do full UAT, creating documents, creating metadata, deleting items. All those changes in the cloud are tracked by a tool. And then we're able to, once UAT is finished, we can roll all those changes back and again start Delta migrations from your on-premise environment, keeping that up to date so that we're drip feeding all of these changes through. So when we actually come to go live weekend, we've got maybe a day's worth of changes, not weeks and weeks that need to be brought up. So we've got a very, very small subset of data which is going to allow us to that any error remediation will be done during those multiple deltas, so that come Friday night and Saturday morning over a go live weekend, those error sets should be from a minimal basis. If suddenly something needs to happen, we can go back into UAT. Again, we just stop synchronizing. We flip the tool back into UAT mode, which is just monitoring the cloud. More UAT is done, and then the cycle keeps going, so that we can then roll back. We do our multiple deltas again to bring everything back, and then come go live weekend, a time is normally established when users are obviously disconnected from the system, so that we can be absolutely sure that no new data is going to be added after we do the final synchronization. So the final synchronization kicks off. Again, we should be talking a few hundred changes, if that have been processed throughout that day. And then the remediation of any errors should be very small at that point. Once that occurs, we're then ready to go live. So over the go live weekend, the client team can do any final testing, any final QA prior to go live on the Monday. That kind of, in a nutshell, outlines very briefly how we use how we migrate existing iManage on-prem customers to the cloud, utilizing some of our tools. Back to you, John. Okay, the benefits of being proactive. Everything is about preparation. There's many quotes from many famous people about preparing. Preparing is everything. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and all that kind of thing. So being proactive up front helps to alleviate and mitigate some of those potential obstacles and pitfalls. So understanding timelines. How long is this going to take us? You know, if you've got no data at all and you just want a cloud environment, we could be talking weeks. If you've got 15, 20 terabytes worth of data, obviously the timelines extend. If we're using Azure copy, you know, it's dependent on the internet bandwidth. So up front, we're able to, you know, estimate how long things are going to take. So we're going to be able to estimate, you know, when may UAT be, when may go live be. Anticipating errors. So having those conversations up front, collaborating with clients, understanding the requirements that they have going forwards, will help us potentially anticipate errors or challenges that are going to come further down the line. Change management. Obviously, Work 10 is a huge change. User adoption. Some people don't like to change, but you know, this is definitely something that's going to benefit them. It's helping them and supporting them through that to say, actually, yes, this is going to help me. You know, I'm willing to give this a try. And then any downtime planning. So obviously, nobody likes to be offline. No firms like to be offline for any longer than they have to be. So we try and obviously plan to go live over a weekend. But being able to be proactive and based on understanding the timelines of when certain aspects of the project are going to happen, you can anticipate when a go live weekend will need to be, and you can start that downtime planning well in advance, getting the people involved to talk to for approvals, communication plans, and everything that's going to help your users not feel stressed about not being able to access the systems that they should normally have access to, whilst we get them to a better place to go live in the iManage cloud on the Monday. So just try, the better we can getting the full picture and anticipating as much as possible enables and prepares us for success and for a smooth migration and a positive go live that users are going to get excited about.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think those are some key points overall, general guidelines for the project. Change management is the biggest thing that we see, and that takes on very different forms depending on if your firm is just going to iManage for the cloud, and also for firms who are on existing versions of iManage going to the cloud. It's making sure that the users have a positive experience all the way through. It should be seen as something that is done to be done with them, not to them. So that's a kind of a guiding principle that we look at when we're moving to the cloud. There's new features, there's new functionality, things should be better. That's why it's important to look at the user interface very carefully to see if people are ingrained in a certain process that takes, this process takes me 6 clicks or 4 clicks, whatever the case may be, and now that process is changing. Sometimes even adding 1 click to a process will turn people against a solution, even though there are many benefits to it. So it's looking at what is important to the firm, what's the key driving factor. If that one process they do most of their day, that one user will say, well, just going to this new system, now I have to do extra clicks, it's going to take me extra time, so I'm going to be less efficient. Now, ideally, is looking at those things in advance and trying to find ways to improve that, to find shorter methods of doing that and maybe more consistent and reliable methods. So that's what we have for overall benefits of being proactive. And that's the main part of our content for today. If you have any questions about any of that content, please use the question option in the Q&A section, and we can go through and answer those right now. So just to give you guys a second to type those in. Okay, one of the questions came in to ask is there a list of things that we then can work on ourselves? So I'll take the first part of this, and Dan, maybe you can add to my thoughts here. Sure. Initially, looking at it from the beginning, it's the knowing your data and going through and understanding what cleanup might be required. If you've been on iManage for a while, there's likely some data issues that might need to be confirmed or cleared up. A number of items, like something simple as you've lost some kind of consistency between folder structures. There's left and right visits. There's technical things there that sometimes things lose their connection. Documents that aren't on the file store that are referred to in the database, various other things. So that can be done right now, even before you're even getting into a project, just to look at some of the key things, some scripts you can run to make sure that your data is consistent. I think I heard one example where a firm had a lot of documents that had a matter number but no client number for some reason. So odd things can happen to your data over the years. We covered this in more detail in the first webinar, but there's a lot of things you could look at now. Also, first thing now is cleanup. If there's content that you know is old or aging, maybe not profiled correctly, maybe you have a lot of flat space content, that's something you can look at right away, because that's something that you really want to address before you start moving into a cloud environment. Dan, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to add a couple of other things. So I was speaking to a client not long ago, and in preparation to start a cloud migration, and one of the first questions they had for me is, when can we get our trainer trained? They wanted to give their trainer and their training team as much time as possible to build internal training plans and start to plan out the best possible approach that they're going to be able to provide their users to give them the positive experience throughout the project and throughout the go live. So that was very important for them, was to get the training done up front. So they wanted to take control of that. They didn't want any other third parties. They obviously had a very specific routine for training that they wanted to adhere to, but they wanted to do it themselves. So that was very important to them. The other one was working with a client who wanted access to the software very quickly. So obviously we were able to provide it, and they built their own packages with some assistance, consulting assistance, purely because of the way that some of the Work 10 desktop features change, in that some of the Work 10 desktop don't use registry files anymore. They actually use config files that are placed within a user's profile. So there's different little nuances, but it's a very collaborative project between a partner and a client. So anything that can help up front and that you want to get involved in is only going to set you up for success.
Okay, perfect. One thing to note on that as well, if you're looking at, for clients that are looking at some information on what they need to do on their environment, Arbro, we do offer a cloud assessment. So to look at where your content is now, maybe give you some opportunities for cleanup and give you an idea about what is going to need to be cleaned up before you go there. So we do have a cloud readiness check that we can assist you with, and likely it's available through, if you're already working with a partner, they might be able to assist you with that as well. Another question we had is, do you provide us data cleanup tools? So looking at things like changing the matter code values, table keys. Yes, there are some solutions that we can provide. iManage does provide some as well. There's consistency check tools, things like that. So if you are looking for those types of tools, we can provide those with our, typically we provide them in a process where we'd be looking at our lift and shift solution, because that has some clear requirements on how the data is supposed to be formatted. The key thing we look at as well is if you're doing a disk ship or a copy of the data through one of the methods that Dan mentioned there, there are some key things that has to happen to that data before it's exported to make sure that it has the correct tables in it so that it can fit into the cloud and you can manage the changes. So that's the key thing to look at, to not have to be able to look at that after you've already shipped it to iManage, then try to track the changes. So key things to look at first. Let's just see if we have any more here. So looking at, is there benefits to moving your clients to Work 10 when you move to the cloud, or can you offer a hybrid approach? So yes, this is, there's a lot of options around this. Initially, firms may want to minimize the amount of changes, so they may not be looking at the Work 10 desktop, so there is an option to put it in as a hybrid approach, as we mentioned there, to have it available but still have some familiarity with your classic clients. That's what we still see the majority of. I think a lot of firms are still waiting for that tree view in the Work 10 desktop, which I believe it has arrived now, but it's the functionality for dragging and dropping is not quite where they want it to be. So firms are still looking at a hybrid approach for the majority now that already are on iManage. In terms of new clients, they are looking at just the Work 10 desktop and keeping up with the auto update function that is available so that you can have your clients updated directly from your control center without having to do another manual rollout. So that's another key advantage of what you can do with the deployment options for the client.
Just to add another quick point onto that is that we see a lot of clients utilizing the hybrid approach because it starts to introduce end users to the Work 10 features and the look and feel through a smaller exposure. So meaning the worksite dialogues, the iManage dialogues between opening and saving and searching, they become Work 10 dialogues. So it's not giving them the full Work 10 experience, but it's getting them used to it in a smaller environment, in preparation for them to say, right, I don't want FileSite anymore. Work 10 through the browser and through Work 10 desktop is exactly the way that I want to work.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Dan. So I think we're getting short on time here, so let's go through just a final slide here. Thanks for joining today. So this is our second of 3 webinars, just to let you know when the next webinar is. It's coming up 2 weeks from now on May 7th. We're going to look at the fastest and least disruptive route to the iManage cloud. We are going to have a guest speaker from one of our clients actually speak to their experience in moving to the cloud here. So that will be something that will be some good information on. Other webinars that we've hosted previously will be available from a link on the arbrosolutions.com website. If you go to the link below, arbrosolutions.com/webinars. So that's what we have for today. Thanks for sticking around. There will be if you could do us the kindness to fill out the feedback sheet that's going to pop up as you exit the webinar, that would be great, so we can make sure that we are continuously making our webinars better. So thanks everyone, and if you're going to be joining the next one, we'll talk to you in a few weeks. Thank you. Take care.